My name is Paige Mercer, and the night I turned 25, my parents took me to Vanterre to tell me I was a line item, not a daughter. My mother smiled when she said they'd only kept me for the tax breaks and state stipends, that now I'd stopped generating value for them. My father slid a stack of papers across the linen tablecloth. They'd already filed to cut me out of every cent they owned. I didn't shed a tear. I sat silent for nearly 60 seconds, letting the words hang in the air between us. But here's what neither of them knew. 6 months before that dinner, I'd found my birth family. And that night, I'd seated them 3 tables directly behind my mother's chair. She just hadn't turned around yet. What happened when she finally did is why I'm sitting here 6 years later, telling you this. Welcome back to Quiet Hour Tales, where we share raw, true family stories about boundaries, dignity, and the moment you stop shrinking to fit a seat no one ever offered you. If you've ever had to earn your place at your own family's table, this one's for you. Drop a comment below and don't forget to subscribe. The restaurant was called Vanterre, and I'd never set foot in it before. My mother picked it, my first red flag, because Diane Mercer never spent a dime on me without a line item justification printed on the receipt. She wore the charcoal cashmere coat she only broke out for board meetings and the rare funeral. My father, Weston, booked the table under her name, not mine. I noticed when the hostess asked, and he answered before I could open my mouth. No balloons, no banner, no cake with my name piped in blue waiting in the back. For a birthday dinner, the table was eerily bare, and the air between my parents had the stiff, polite chill of people about to read a guilty verdict. I'd spent 4 years sitting in rooms like this for work, booking tables for clients, for estate signings, for the quiet, tense conversations families have when someone dies and the money starts moving. I knew the difference between a dinner and a deposition. And this had the temperature of a deposition. So I did what I always do when a room goes cold. I focused on my breathing and counted the emergency exits. That's when I spotted the small brass number on the table behind us, table 9. I memorized it for no reason I could name, the way you note a landmark before you realize you'll need to find your way back. I set a thin manila folder beside my water glass. Plain, unremarkable. My mother glanced at it and assumed it was a resume or a business card. She had no idea what I'd stuffed inside. To understand why I wasn't surprised, you have to understand birthdays in our house. When I was little, my birthday meant one limp candle pressed into a store-bought cupcake my mother grabbed on her way home from work, never refrigerated, always sweating on the counter while she took work calls. 3 weeks later, my cousin Brett got a rented bounce house and a catered party with silver trays of appetizers, because Brett was my Aunt Renee's biological son. Blood, as they love to say. When I turned 8, I asked if I could have a party too. My aunt was visiting, drinking my mother's wine, and she answered for her, "We can only do one nice thing a month, honey." It was said kindly, which was the part that hurt most, how gentle people can sound while explaining your worth to you. So I learned the math. 1 cupcake costs less than a party. A kid who asks for less is cheaper than a kid who asks for more. By 9, I'd stopped asking for cake altogether. It made the arithmetic easier for everyone, and being easy felt like the only currency I had. I told myself it wasn't sad, just efficient. That's the thing about growing up useful. You don't realize you've been priced until someone reads the number out loud. And across that white tablecloth at Vanterre, 25 years old, I could feel my mother getting ready to read it. I left home the week I turned 18 with 2 duffel bags and a community college acceptance letter I'd filled out myself. No one drove me. I worked nights at a pharmacy, took morning classes, transferred to a state university, and finished an estate paralegal program while waiting tables on weekends. I paid for every cent of it, not because I'm special, but because it matters for what came next. No one handed me a thing. By 25, I was a paralegal at a downtown trusts and estates firm, and I was good at it. I spent my days organizing what happens to a person's life after they can't hold on to it anymore, drafting the boring clauses that decide who eats and who doesn't long after the funeral flowers wilt. I could read a trust the way some people read a face. The joke of my life? I could set perfect boundaries for total strangers, tell a grieving widow exactly what she was owed and what she wasn't, but I couldn't ask my own family to want me. The only person who ever called me was my grandmother, Nana Ruth. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., like clockwork. She was the only Mercer who answered the phone like she'd been waiting for it to ring. And one thing she said to me became the hinge the whole night swung on. Nana was my father's mother, the only adult in that family who made me feel like a person, not a tax deduction. She had opinions about everything and apologized for nothing. When I was 12, crying in her kitchen because Brett told me I wasn't a real Mercer, she put down her dish towel, took my chin in her hand, and said the sentence I carried for 13 years. You weren't collected, sweetheart. You were chosen. Then she fried me a grilled cheese on her cast iron skillet and let me stay up past my bedtime playing with her button jar. Nana died when I was 23, 2 years before that dinner. I gave the only eulogy that mentioned her as a person, not a bank account. Within a month of the funeral, my parents quietly moved out of their cramped split level and into the big house on Linden Road, the one tied to Nana's name in ways I understood better than they ever would. I didn't think much of it then. I was grieving. But Nana had said something on one of our last phone calls, her voice thin over the line, that I filed away without understanding. You'll never have to ask anyone for permission to live your own life. I thought it was encouragement, a grandmother telling her granddaughter to be strong. It would be 6 months before that dinner, while pulling county records for a work case, that I learned she meant it literally written into a notarized trust. The year before I turned 25, my family started going quiet around me, not the comfortable kind. Texts that used to come within an hour took 3 days. My mother stopped looping me into holiday planning, then acted shocked when I showed up to Thanksgiving without a side dish no one had asked me to bring. My Aunt Renee, meanwhile, got louder. She started using a word in the family group chat she'd never bothered with before, blood. As in, this is a blood-only weekend at the lake, as in, the cabin sleeps 8. We're keeping it to blood this year. I understood perfectly. I just didn't have the documents yet to know why the temperature had dropped so suddenly. Families drift, sure, but this was coordinated. My analytical brain kept flagging it, the way you notice 3 unrelated bills arrive on the same Tuesday and realize they're connected. So when my phone lit up in late March with my mother's name and a voice 3 degrees warmer than it had been in a year, I didn't feel flattered. I felt the cold click of a lock turning somewhere I couldn't see. Honey, she said, she only called me honey when she wanted something. We'd like to take you out to properly celebrate your 25th. The way we never quite managed. Every instinct I'd built in 4 years of handling other people's messy estates told me the same thing. This was too neat. Most people get my mother wrong. They think her cruelty is loud. It isn't. Her cruelty is the planning. The cruelty is a woman who never once remembered a birthday cake, suddenly reserving a corner table at Banter and calling it proper celebration. When Diane gets generous, it's because a spreadsheet told her the generosity will pay for itself. I'd watched it my whole life. I'd just never been the line item before. So I said yes sweetly, the way she'd taught me. Then I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for an hour, connecting dots. The Linden Road house, the sudden obsession with blood, Nana's last words, and the manila folder already in my work bag. The one I'd assembled 6 months earlier to finally trace my roots, with no connection to my mother at all. I didn't call my parents to demand answers. Instead, I made a few quiet calls of my own, the kind you make when you've decided you won't be ambushed. You'll be ready. People assume this story is about money. I get why. There's a will, a house, a folder on a table. But sitting in my car in the Vanterre parking lot that night, engine off, hands steady on the wheel, the thing I was afraid of losing had no dollar amount. I was afraid of losing the last belief that I belonged anywhere. As cold as that house was, as transactional as every cupcake and every casserole, it was still the only origin story I had. They were still technically my parents. And if they cut that thread that night, I'd be exactly what Brett called me at 12. Not a real Mercer, just a girl someone picked up and put down. That was the wound they were aiming for, and they knew it, because they'd been poking it my whole life. What they didn't account for. The wound had already closed. 6 months of knowing the right people will do that. I checked my reflection in the visor mirror, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked across the parking lot with the calm of a woman who'd read the last page of a book everyone else thought was still being written. I wasn't going to a disownment. I was going to a goodbye I'd already chosen. They just didn't know it yet. We ordered drinks before anyone said a true thing. My mother praised the wine list. My father told a parking story he'd already shared in the car. Between the bread basket and the entrees no one would eat, Diane folded her hands and shifted into the voice, the one she used when she returned a Christmas gift in front of me and explained why it wasn't practical. "We've always done our best for you," she started. Weston nodded a half-second behind her, the way he'd done for 30 years. "We gave you a roof, an education, more than some children ever get." I let her talk. I rested my hand flat on the manila folder beside my plate and watched my father's eyes flick down to it, then away. The folder had a typed label on the tab, for letters peeking out above my fingers. He looked at them. I covered the rest with my thumb, not to hide it, just to let him wonder. Then my mother launched into a lecture about sacrifice, about how a child should understand the cost of being raised. I thought about a sweating cupcake and one limp candle, and said nothing. Then she paused, took a sip of wine, set the glass down with the precision of a woman rehearsing a slide, and said the line that opened the door to everything. "There's something you should have been told a long time ago, Paige. You're adopted," she said, like she was announcing a change to a dinner reservation. "We adopted you as an infant. You were never biologically ours. We never planned to keep this from you forever." She watched my face, waiting for me to collapse. This was the moment she'd engineered. The corner table, the cashmere coat, the practiced pauses, all built to land here, when her adopted daughter learned she'd been a stranger all along and broke into pieces Diane could sweep up and walk away from. I'd love to tell you it didn't land. It did. Part of you always braces for the floor to be there, and mine had just been told there was no floor. But I'd had 6 months to process this. The only thing my mother revealed that night was how little she knew me. She leaned in, almost gentle, and delivered the sentence I'll hear in waiting rooms and quiet kitchens for the rest of my life. "We only kept you for the benefits." She smiled when she said it. And that smile, cold, polished, utterly devoid of remorse, was what finally freed me. I'd grown up on her cruelty. But a woman doesn't smile delivering the worst news of your life unless she's rehearsed it enough times to enjoy the performance. In that smile, I saw the whole shape of it. I hadn't been a disappointing daughter. I'd been an asset that finished depreciating. Benefits is a clean word for a dirty arrangement. And my father, to his discredit, tried to explain it like an accountant defending a tax loophole. "There were state stipends when you were little," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Those ran out when you were in grade school. Then there were tax breaks. And your grandmother, well, she had expectations about family. Adopting you helped us meet those. For years, it was worthwhile." I sat still and let the arithmetic of my childhood rearrange itself. The one cupcake. The hand-me-downs from Brett with Renee's return tags still on them. The way the heat got turned down in my room first every winter. They hadn't been poor. They'd been pocketing the difference between what a child costs and what a child generates. I'd been the generator. "We invested in you," Weston said, as if that settled it, as if a child were a rental property with a depreciation schedule. Then my mother, impatient with his rambling, cut to the core. "The subsidies ended when you were a kid, Paige. And what comes after them ends tonight. You're 25. There's nothing keeping you around does for us anymore. You're not useful." She said it almost regretfully, like noting a coupon had expired. 2 sentences, and they'd reduced 25 years of being their daughter to a line that stopped producing income. I reached for my water. My hand didn't shake. I noticed that and filed it away as a small, surprising gift. Then Weston did what he'd come to do. He reached into the leather portfolio he'd brought, the one I assumed held a birthday card, and slid a thin stack of papers across the tablecloth until it touched my plate. "We've already filed to formalize things," he said. "You won't be in our will. You won't be a beneficiary on anything. We wanted to do this cleanly, in person, so there's no confusion later." He'd rehearsed it well. I could hear the estate lawyer coaching him in every word. Here's the part my family never understood, the part that turned the night without me saying a word. I scanned the first page in 4 seconds flat. I'd read thousands of filings like it. And I saw immediately what they'd done. They'd filed against the wrong instrument. They'd spent good money cutting me out of their modest personal will, while leaving entirely untouched the document that actually decided everything. They thought the power in this room ran through their own will. That's where they'd aimed their knife. I didn't correct them. You don't tell the other side they've sued the wrong defendant. You let them finish. So I slid the papers an inch toward the center of the table, neither accepting nor refusing, and let them believe they'd won. Across the table, my Aunt Renee's voice crackled through my mother's purse on speakerphone. Of course she was listening. She'd helped plan this. Blood looks after blood, Paige, she said, warm as a knife in soup. You've always understood that. I didn't cry. Part of me had expected to. The 12-year-old still living in my chest had braced for this, since Brett called me a fake. But 25-year-old me took a slow sip of water and set the glass down without a sound. I watched something cross my mother's face I'd never seen before. Disappointment. Not at me, at the performance. She'd written this scene with a sobbing girl in the lead, and the girl wasn't sobbing. It ruined her ending. Aren't you going to say anything? She snapped, her voice brittle. I considered it. I considered the flood of 25 years of resentment. Then she made the mistake people like her always make. She repeated the line that worked the first time, expecting it to work again. We only kept you for the benefits, she said slower, leaning on each word, trying to draw blood. But a sentence loses its teeth the second time you hear it from the same mouth. The first time it was a revelation. The second? Just a confession about her, not me. It told me everything about her and nothing about my worth. I smoothed my napkin in my lap once and let her watch me not break. Behind her, at table 9, I saw a woman with my exact chin turned toward our table and go still. To explain what was in my folder, I have to take you back 6 months, to the week 2 envelopes arrived and changed everything. The first, after Nana died, I'd finally registered with the state adoption registry, half convinced nothing would come of it. 8 weeks later, a letter arrived in looping, careful handwriting. It was from Susan Hale. She wrote that she'd been 19 when she gave me up, that she'd never wanted to, that she'd thought about me every March for 25 years, and that if I ever wanted to meet her, she'd drive any distance, any day, no expectations. She signed it, and, under her name, wrote the line I read until the paper went soft. I never gave your seed away. It's been waiting for you since the day I let you go. The second envelope came 3 days later, and it had nothing to do with Susan, or so I thought. Our state had recently opened original birth records to adult adoptees, and I'd filed a request the same week Susan's letter arrived. While I was in the county system, I pulled the file on Nana's estate, professional habit, the way a dentist looks at strangers' teeth. And there it was, in the distribution schedule of the Ruth Mercer Legacy Trust, executed 2 years before her death, administered by a bank. Caregiver distributions to Weston and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. Not their estate. Hers. Held by a trustee they couldn't touch, scheduled to leave their hands forever on the exact date they'd chosen for that dinner. 2 envelopes in 1 week. One told me where I came from. The other told me exactly what my parents were about to lose, and why they were in such a hurry. I didn't call my mother to scream. Outbursts make great evidence for lawyers. I'd watched families lose everything to a satisfying shout. I used process. I took a personal day, hired an estate attorney with no ties to my family, and paid her to confirm what I already knew. The caregiver stipends were legitimate, ending on my 25th birthday. My parents had been drawing a monthly sum for 2 decades, funded by Nana's trust. The remainder passed to me by the trust's own terms, through a corporate trustee they couldn't override, sign, or shred. Their will was irrelevant. Their disownment was theater performed on the wrong stage. My attorney asked if I wanted to notify them early, soften the landing. I said no. I wanted 3 things in a folder: my retainer letter, the trust distribution schedule, and my original birth certificate with Susan's name on it. I carried that folder for 6 months like a quiet engine I hadn't turned on yet. The dinner invitation just told me when to turn the key. I met Susan for the first time in a roadside diner off I-75, Halfway between our towns, she'd pick the spot so I wouldn't have to drive as far, a small kindness that undid me more than any speech. She was nervous, opening and closing a photo album without showing me, like she wasn't sure she'd earned the right. She had my chin and my habit of going quiet when I felt too much. Over 6 months, we built something careful, the way you repair a bridge while standing on it. I learned I had a half-brother, Danny, 20, all elbows and bad jokes, who started sending me memes a week after we met, like I'd always been there. I learned my birth grandmother, Pearl, was a tiny, ferocious woman who took one look at me and said, well, there she is, like I'd just been late, not gone for 25 years. They never asked me for anything. No favors, no money, no role to perform. Susan told me the 3rd time we met the truest line of my life. We kept a seat for you, sweetheart. Never gave it to anyone else. I, who could draft perfect beneficiary clauses for strangers, sat in a vinyl booth and didn't know what to do with my hands. I'd been wanted for the first time by people who got nothing out of wanting me. After 25 years of being useful, I had no idea how to simply be welcome. I was about to learn fast. There's a difference between being needed and being wanted. And I'd only ever known the former. Being needed is a job. You show up, you produce, you stay easy. In exchange, you keep your seat another quarter. I'd mistaken that steady transaction for love, the way you mistake a long commute for a destination just because you do it every day. What Susan, Danny, and Pearl offered had no job attached, and that terrified me more than my mother ever had. The first time Susan called just to ask how my week was, with no agenda, I waited the whole conversation for the catch. When there wasn't one, I had to pull my car over because I couldn't see the road. I tested them in small, ungenerous ways. I'd cancel plans to see if they'd punish me. They didn't. They just said, next time. Meant it. I'd offered to pay for everything to earn my seat. Pearl finally took my face in her hands the way Nana used to and said, you don't have to buy your way in here. We already paid. Slowly, over 6 months, the knot I'd carried since I was 9 began to loosen. I started to believe, against 25 years of evidence, that a person could simply want me in the room. So when my mother called to properly celebrate my 25th, I already knew where I wanted to spend the evening. I just decided to do it all at once. The night my mother booked Vanterre, I called Susan and asked the question I'd been too afraid to ask anyone. Will you come to my birthday dinner? I explained the whole setup, the parents, the trust, the speech I could feel coming. I told her I didn't want to hear it alone. She didn't hesitate. What time? Where? Should we dress up? Then she said the thing that made me cover my mouth in my kitchen. We'd be honored to watch you not need them. I made one more call to Vanterre and booked a second table under my own name, Paige Mercer, party of 3. Table 9, the host told me, near the back, 3 tables behind the Mercer party of 3 at the front. I almost laughed at the geometry of it. They had no idea they'd be performing my disownment within sight of the family that had saved me a seat for 25 years. I told Susan, Pearl, and Danny to arrive a little after us, order quietly, and wait for me to come to them. I won't pretend I didn't want witnesses. There's a reason truth lands harder spoken in front of people than mailed in a letter. Private confrontations only ever become one side's word against yours. But they were never just witnesses. They were the reason the evening existed at all. Back at the front table, my mother decided the silence had gone on long enough. She pulled one more page from the portfolio, uncapped a pen, and set it across the paper like a gift. It's just an acknowledgement that we informed you, that you understand, she said. Sign it, and we can all have a civilized dinner and go our separate ways. I looked at the page. It was the same boilerplate I'd typed hundreds of times at work. The undersigned hereby waives and releases any claim, interest, or expectancy. It wasn't an acknowledgement. It was a waiver disguised as one designed to get me to agree on record that I had no claim before the shock wore off and I could think. A classic move. I'd seen grieving people sign away fortunes at kitchen tables because someone slid a pen over at the right wounded moment. My mother was counting on my shock. She didn't know my shock was already over. I left the pen where it lay. Weston kept glancing at my folder, worry climbing up his neck in a red tide. He'd always known where the real money lived. He'd seen the 4 letters on the tab. He was doing the math now, and the answer was starting to scare him. Is there something we should know, Paige? He started, then stopped. I smiled, the first real smile of the night. Not yet. That's when Renee arrived with bread in tow, feigning surprise like people who'd been waiting in the bar for a text. Paige, what a coincidence, Renee said, pressing a cold cheek to mine. I knew instantly. Diane had summoned reinforcements. Renee pulled up a chair without asking. Brett, 26 and still dressed like his mother bought his clothes, gave me the look I'd gotten since we were kids, the one that said I'd always end up at the kids' table. Renee got right to it. We just want what's best for the family. Hard choices have to be made about who's really part of us. You've always been practical, Paige. You understand blood looks after blood. There it was again, the word she'd spammed in the group chat all year, finally said out loud at the table it was built for. I looked at my aunt, who'd answered for my mother when I turned 8, explaining why I wasn't worth the party, and felt the last thread of obligation in me snap. These weren't people I was losing. They were people I was setting down. I'd carried them further than they deserved, and my arms were finally tired. Across the table, Weston wasn't joining in. He was staring at his hands. Then, over Renee's chatter, he leaned toward me and said quietly, "Your grandmother loved you." He stopped there. For a second, I saw the version of Weston Mercer who might have existed if he'd ever chosen a hard thing over an easy one. His eyes were wet. He'd loved his mother, I knew that much was true. And some part of him understood that the woman he loved had built a wall around me with her own money because she didn't trust him to protect me. That's a terrible thing to sit with at a dinner table. I waited for the next sentence, an apology. This is wrong. It never came. He looked at my mother, who was watching him like a handler watches a dog near a road, and chose comfort one last time. He sat back, picked up his water, and the almost sentence died in his throat, like so many others before it. That was the closest thing to love anyone at the front table offered me all night, for words and a swallow. I didn't hate him for it. You can't hate a man for being exactly the way you always knew he was. But I finally understood why they'd filed in such a hurry. He knew about Nana's trust. He knew the date was coming. And he'd hoped desperately to get my signature on a waiver before I found out what his mother had done for me. So I asked him a question, not as a daughter, but in the voice I use at work when I find a flaw in a client's filing. Dad, which instrument did you file under? Your estate or Nana's trust? The table went silent in a new way. My mother's wine glass paused midair. Renee's manicured hand stopped patting my mother's. Weston blinked at me like I'd started speaking a language he half recognized. In 8 words, I'd told them 3 things they hadn't budgeted for. I knew the difference between the 2. I knew which one mattered. And I'd known long enough to learn the vocabulary cold. My mother had never heard me use that voice before. To them, I'd always been the quiet one, the easy one, the girl who took the smaller slice to keep the peace. They'd built this entire evening on the assumption that I'd receive my fate, not audit it. What? My mother said, her voice smaller than she meant it to. What are you talking about? I let the question hang. The most powerful person in any room is the one who doesn't need to rush to an answer. I turned my water glass a quarter turn on the cloth, lined it up with the manila folder, and looked at Weston, who had gone pale, silently begging me with his eyes not to open it. Then I opened the folder. No flourish, no slam document, no speech. I simply turned it to face them and laid the 3 pages out on the white cloth, side by side, the way I'd lay exhibits in front of a client who needed to understand their own situation. My retainer letter, the trust distribution schedule with the relevant paragraph highlighted, and my original birth certificate with Susan's name where my mother had assumed hers belonged. I didn't point at anything. I let the paper do the work. My mother's eyes went to the trust schedule first, of course they did. Some animal part of her had always known where the real money slept. I watched her read it. Caregiver distributions to Weston and Diane Mercer shall terminate upon the beneficiary's 25th birthday, whereupon the remainder shall pass to my granddaughter, Paige. I watched her reach the words remainder and pass, and watched the color drain from her face from the top down, like a window shade being pulled. She looked up at me, then at Weston, then back at the page, hoping the second reading would say something kinder. It didn't. It never does. Mom, I said gently, because I could afford to be gentle now. You filed against the wrong family. The one you cut me out of was always the smaller one. My mother is a fast woman, I'll give her that. It took her 10 seconds to assemble the full picture, the Linden Road house, funded by a trust she'd assumed she'd live in forever. The monthly stipends that furnished her comfortable life, ending tonight by their own terms. The remainder, the real money, passing to the daughter she'd just declared useless. And the waiver, her clever little trap I'd almost signed, which was worth precisely nothing because it targeted an estate that never held the value. She'd aimed every weapon at a will and missed the trust entirely. The cruelty was free. The mistake was expensive. People expect this is where I made them pay, where I listed the trust's value, watched them squirm, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu, and left them the bill. I understand the urge. But here's the truth about power. The strongest position in any room isn't holding the biggest number. It's not needing the number at all. I had a career I'd built with my own hands. Savings I'd earned waiting tables and drafting documents. I didn't need Nana's money to be free. And that, more than any dollar figure, was what my mother could not survive understanding. So I closed the folder, gathered the pages unhurriedly, and set the pen they'd brought for my surrender neatly beside her plate. I'd won the thing they thought we were fighting over before any of them sat down. I'd won it by knowing, by preparing, by refusing to be ambushed. There was nothing left to argue. Only the choice of where to spend the rest of my birthday. And I'd made that choice 6 months ago in a vinyl diner booth when a nervous woman with my chin slid a photo album across a table and didn't ask me for a single thing. I administer estates for a living, and I'll tell you what I tell every client being circled by people who only show up when there's something to gain. If someone in your life only values you when you're useful, you already know what that is. And no amount of shared history makes it love. Type boundaries below if you've had to learn that the hard way. And subscribe, because the part you came for is about to happen. I stood up. No drama, just a woman pushing her chair back. The effect on the front table was immediate. My mother's hand was still hanging in the air where mine should have been. Sit down, she snapped, the maternal mask slipping, the old cold control snapping back into her voice. Where on earth do you think you're going? Renee straightened. Brett stopped smirking. Weston just looked tired, the look of a man watching the only good thing his mother ever did walk out of his reach forever. I picked up the folder, held it against my chest, and looked at my mother, the woman who'd spent 25 years trying to convince me I had no real place anywhere. My birth family is sitting 3 tables behind you, I said, plainly. I didn't say it cruelly. I didn't need to. It had been true the whole meal. True while she smiled and rehearsed and slid her waiver across the cloth. She thought she was performing my disownment for strangers. She was performing it within arm's reach of the people who'd saved me a seat since before she decided I'd stopped being useful. I watched my words land. Watched my mother begin to turn around slowly, the way you turn when some part of you already knows and is begging the rest of you to be wrong. Her cashmere-clad shoulders rotated, her chin came around, and there at table 9, 3 tables back, beneath the warm low light, were Susan, Pearl, and Danny. They'd been there the entire time, ordering quietly, eating almost nothing, watching my mother deliver the worst sentences of my life, and keeping their seats because I'd asked them to let me come to them. Susan met my mother's eyes first. No glare, no gloating, just a look at the woman who'd raised her daughter on 1 candle and a calculator. Then she looked at me, and her whole face opened like a window in spring. Pearl, small and ferocious, already had her napkin folded by her plate ready. Danny had stopped pretending to look at his phone. My mother's gaze darted from Susan's chin to mine and back, doing the resemblance math. I saw the exact moment she understood. The family she'd just told me I didn't have was sitting 15 feet behind her, in real chairs, at a real table, having watched her do the one thing she could never take back in front of witnesses she didn't know she had. She turned back to me, her mouth opening, nothing coming out. For the first time in my life, my mother had no script. In the silence where her next cruel line should have been, a chair scraped back at table 9. All 3 of them stood, not to make a scene, not to confront, just to be on their feet when I crossed the room, the way you stand for someone arriving after a long flight. Pearl first, then Susan, then Danny, knocking his knee on the table leg in his hurry. They didn't say a word to my parents. They didn't have to. Their standing said everything. The restaurant went quiet around us, the particular hush of strangers who feel something true happening and stop pretending not to watch. A waiter froze with a tray. I walked past my mother, still half-turned in her chair. Past Renee, whose mouth had finally run out of the word blood. Past Weston, who lifted his eyes to me as I passed, then dropped them again, choosing comfort one last time. 15 feet. 3 tables. 25 years. When I reached them, Pearl took my face in both her hands, the way Nana used to. Susan pulled out the empty chair beside hers, the 4th chair, the one they'd asked the host to set even though their reservation was for 3. "We saved you a seat," she said, the words I'd read until the paper went soft. We always did. I sat down in it, the seat that had been waiting my whole life, at the table that had wanted me before they knew if I'd ever come. That's when my mother lost the one thing she'd never lost in public, her composure. I heard her chair scrape, heard her stand, heard the calm veneer of the evening crack straight down the middle. "After everything we paid for," she shouted, her voice carrying across the dining room. "After everything we did for you, schools, roof, years, you do this to us in public? Humiliate your family over money." Heads turned openly now. A man at the bar set down his drink. Renee tugged at my mother's sleeve, hissing, "Diane, sit down. People are looking." But my mother was past caring. The script was gone, and all she had left was the truth coming out sideways. "We gave you everything," she yelled to a room full of strangers. I noticed she said gave, not loved. Even cornered, the word love wouldn't come because it had never been in her inventory. I stayed in my seat at table 9. I didn't stand to match her. I didn't raise my voice. Susan's hand found mine under the table, and I just held it, letting my mother be loud, because her loudness was doing my work for me. Every person in that restaurant was watching a calm young woman seated quietly with people who clearly adored her, and a furious older woman screaming about everything she'd paid for. And no one in the world hears a parent rant about money and thinks, there's the real family. Weston never stood. He just put his face in his hands. I let her run out of words the way a storm runs out of rain. When the quiet came back, I did one last thing before giving my full attention to my real family. I walked back to the front table and set the trust distribution schedule face up on the white cloth in front of her. I didn't need it anymore. My attorney had the originals, and I wanted my mother to have something to read on the longest night of her life. "You can keep this one," I said. "You'll want to understand what ended today and what didn't." She stared at the page. Weston reached for it, then didn't. I looked at them both, my mother, who'd priced me at 1 candle, and my father, who'd loved his own mother too much to honor her final wishes. "You kept me for the benefits," I said, the only pre-planned sentence of the night. They kept a seat for me. Then I turned around and walked back to table 9. I didn't look back. Not when Renee called my name. Not when my mother said something I couldn't hear and didn't want to. Pearl had ordered me a slice of dark chocolate cake while I was gone, my favorite, though I'd never told her that. Danny had jammed a single birthday candle into the frosting, the wax already dripping a little from the warm air. For a second, the symmetry caught in my throat. Then Susan leaned over and said, "Blow it out, sweetheart. Make a wish." I realized I didn't have one. I already had it. The trust did exactly what Nana built it to do. On my 25th birthday, the caregiver distributions to Weston and Diane Mercer ended, by the terms Nana had notarized 2 years before her death. The remainder passed to me through the bank trustee, untouched by the will my parents had spent good money revising, because you can't disinherit someone from a trust you don't control. Their unsigned waiver was worth exactly what it had always been, nothing. Within a year, my parents sold the Linden Road house. Without the trust stipends, they couldn't afford it and moved into a smaller place. Renee was furious to learn none of Nana's money would flow to Brett after all. The story of that dinner traveled the way these stories do, through the family and beyond. The version where Diane Mercer was a devoted mother wronged by an ungrateful adopted daughter never stuck, Too many strangers at Vanterre had watched a woman scream about everything she'd paid for, while a quiet girl held hands with the family across the room. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't post anything online. I simply stopped answering and let the silence be the boundary, the only kind that ever holds. My father texted me once a few weeks later. 3 words, no signature, no follow-up. I am sorry. I never replied. I heard later that when Renee tried to rally the family to contest Nana's trust, it was Weston who quietly shut it down, telling them their mother had every right to leave her money where she pleased. He was right. He was also, as ever, a year too late, saying it to the wrong room, when it cost him nothing and changed nothing. That was the whole of my father in the end. A man who knew the right thing, even felt it, but could only bring himself to do it once it required nothing of him. I didn't need the apology, but I was glad, in a small, clean way, that he'd finally said it out loud. As for the rest of it, I spent that first real birthday eating chocolate cake at table 9 with people who got nothing from wanting me. I've spent every birthday since with them. Susan and I talk every Sunday at 4 p.m. now, the hour I used to save for Nana. Pearl taught me to make her grilled cheese. Danny still sends memes. And in a drawer at my new family's kitchen, there's a photo album that doesn't close anymore because it finally has enough pages. Being useful was all my parents ever wanted from me. Being wanted was the one thing I'd never had. And it took me 25 years and one terrible dinner to learn. Anyone who only keeps you for the benefits has already told you, in the plainest language possible, that they were never your family at all. That's my story. 24 years of one lonely candle. And on the 25th, a whole table that lit them all without being asked. If someone in your life only values you when you're useful, take this as your sign to stop auditioning for a seat you already deserve. You don't have to earn the people who love you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.